The moment I saw my son's name on the deed transfer, something inside me that had been bending for 30 years finally broke. My lake house, the one I'd scraped and saved for, the one I'd finally paid off just last year now, legally belonged to my son Bradley. My fingers trembled as I held the county records printout Linda from church had quietly slipped to me after Sunday service. Margaret, I work at the county clerk's office, and I saw this come through last week. I thought you should know, she had whispered, her eyes full of concern. I stood in my kitchen, still wearing my church clothes, staring at the paper until the words blurred. This wasn't some stranger's mistake. This was my son-me own flesh and blood taking what I had worked my entire life to build. The lake house had been my dream since I was a young mother, watching the wealthy families enjoy their summer retreats while I cleaned their homes for extra money. For 35 years, I had put aside every spare penny, working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, telling myself that someday I would have my own little piece of paradise. I finally bought it 15 years ago, small, somewhat shabby cabin on Lake Tullymore, with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the sunset perfectly. The mortgage had been steep for a woman on my income, but I made every payment, even during the lean years after my husband passed. I had finally paid it off last year, at the age of 67, hosting a small personal mortgage burning ceremony, with just my cat Rusty as witness. I had planned to spend my retirement years there, watching the seasons change across the water, hosting my grandkids during summers, finding the peace I'd earned after a lifetime of working and giving to others. And now, with a few strokes of a pen, it was gone. I set the paper down on my kitchen table and ran my finger over the embossed seal from the county records office. There was no mistake. I thought back to 6 months ago when Bradley had asked to help me with my finances. He had suggested putting his name on some of my accounts, just in case something happens to you. Mom. He had brought papers for me to sign, explaining them quickly while I made his favorite dinner pot roast with extra carrots, just how he liked it since he was a boy. I remembered signing several documents, trusting my son completely. After all, Bradley was the successful one-of-me only child who had made it big in real estate development in the city. He knew about these things, and I was just a retired school cafeteria worker who had never quite mastered anything more complicated than balancing my checkbook. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. 67 years old, and I'd just been swindled by my own son. The phone rang, startling me out of my shock. I glanced at the caller. It was Bradley. My hand hovered over the receiver, my heart pounding in my chest. Did I confront him now? What would I even say? The phone kept ringing, its shrill tone matching the panic rising in my throat. Finally, I answered. "Hey, Mom." His voice was cheerful, oblivious. "Just checking in. How was church?" I swallowed hard, my free hand still resting on the property record. "Fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Great, great. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the lake house. Jessica and I were thinking we'd use it for the whole summer this year. The kids are getting older, and we want them to have that classic summer experience, you know? Swimming, boating, the whole thing." My knuckles turned white around the phone. The whole summer. My first summer of retirement, when I had planned to finally enjoy the fruits of my decades of labor gone too. "You there, Mom?" Bradley asked, after my prolonged silence. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm here." "So what do you think? We take good care of the place, obviously. You could come up for a weekend or 2 if you want, but we really want to make it our family place for the summer." Our family place, as if it belonged to him already, which, according to the paper in front of me, it apparently did. Something shifted inside me at that moment. A lifetime of accommodating others, of putting my needs last, of believing that maternal sacrifice was the highest virtue, it all suddenly felt like a lie I'd been telling myself. I had worked too hard and too long to be pushed aside now. Actually, Bradley, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice had become, I have plans for the lake house this summer. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What kind of plans? He asked, his tone losing some of its cheerfulness. My plans, I said simply. I've just retired, and I intend to spend my summer at my lake house. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, we've already told the kids. They're excited about it. Can't you just… No, I interrupted, shocking both of us. I never interrupted anyone, least of all my son. I'm sorry your children will be disappointed, but I have made my decision. Is everything okay? You sound strange, Bradley said, concern mingling with frustration in his voice. Everything is fine, I lied. I'll talk to you later, Bradley. I need to go now. I hung up before he could respond, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, the property record still on the table, the phone silent in its cradle. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I laughed. A wild, slightly unhinged laugh that startled Rusty from his sunny spot on the windowsill. The absurdity of it all struck me suddenly. My son thought he had won. He had the legal document, the official deed. But what he didn't realize was that his mother, his plain, accommodating, predictable mother still, had a few surprises left. I picked up the phone again and dialed my best friend Irene's number. Irene and I had been friends since our 20s, raising our children together, supporting each other through marriages, jobs, deaths, and all of life's messiness. If anyone would understand, it would be Irene. You will not believe what Bradley has done, I said when she answered. 20 minutes later, after I had poured out the whole sordid story, Irene was as outraged as I'd expected. That ungrateful little weasel, she exclaimed. After everything you've done for him, Margaret, you need to call a lawyer right now. I will, I assured her. But I need to do something else first, something for me. What are you thinking? Irene asked, caution in her voice. She knew me well enough to recognize the unusual determination in my tone. I'm going to the lake house tomorrow. I'm going to change the locks, and I'm going to spend my summer exactly as I planned. But, if he legally owns it now, Irene trailed off. Then he can legally evict me, I finished for her. But that will take time, and it will force him to admit what he's done. No more hiding behind paperwork and sweet talk. If he wants to throw his mother out of her own house, he'll have to do it to my face. After talking with Irene, I called my nephew Thomas, who was a lawyer in a town about an hour away. Thomas was my late sister's son, and we had always been close. He was shocked by what Bradley had done, but cautioned me about taking any drastic action. Aunt Maggie, if the deed has been transferred, you could be putting yourself in a difficult legal position by changing locks or preventing access, he warned. I understand that, Thomas, I replied. But I need time to figure this out, and I'm not going to sit by while he takes over the place I worked my whole life for. Can you help me? Thomas sighed heavily. Let me look into exactly what happened with the deed transfer. There might be grounds for contesting it, especially if you weren't fully informed about what you were signing. In the meantime, just be careful, okay? Document everything. I will, I promised. And Thomas, thank you. After hanging up, I went to my bedroom and pulled out my suitcase, the good one I had splurged on 5 years ago for a cruise Irene had convinced me to take. I began packing methodically, comfortable clothes, my medications, my favorite books, and the photo album of my late husband Jack. Jack had passed away 12 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with cancer. He had never seen the lake house, but he had known about my dream and had always encouraged me to keep saving for it. You'll get there, Maggie, he used to say. And when you do, make sure you put a rocking chair on that porch for me. I had done just that, a beautiful handcrafted rocker that sat empty but was always in my mind, Jack's chair. As I packed, I thought about what my next steps should be. Thomas would handle the legal side, but I needed allies closer to the lake house. I picked up the phone again and called my neighbor at the lake, Eleanor Peterson. Eleanor was in her 70s, a retired librarian who lived in the cabin next to mine year-round. We had become friendly over the years, often sharing evening glasses of wine on my porch while watching the sunset. "Eleanor, it's Margaret Wilson," I said when she answered. "Margaret, are you coming up early this year? I thought you weren't due until June." "There's been a change of plans," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I'm coming tomorrow, and I might need your help with something." By the time I went to bed that night, I had a plan forming. It wasn't just about reclaiming my property, though. That was certainly part of it. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, my right to put myself first after decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day. I loaded my suitcase into my 7-year-old Honda Civic, settled Rusty in his carrier, much to his vocal displeasure, and set off for Lake Tullymore. The drive took just under 3 hours, and with each mile, I felt my resolve strengthening. By the time I turned onto the familiar gravel road that led to my little blue cabin, I was calm in a way I hadn't been in years. This was right. This was necessary. This was overdue. Eleanor was waiting on her porch as I pulled up, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. She waved and made her way over as I parked. "You sounded upset on the phone," she said by way of greeting. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything about Bradley, the deed transfer, his plans to take over the lake house for the summer. Eleanor's face darkened as I spoke, her mouth setting in a hard line. "That's not right," she said firmly when I finished. "Not right at all. What can I do to help?" "Just keep an eye out," I said. "Bradley has a key, and I'm going to change the locks today. If he shows up while I'm in town getting that done, call me immediately." Eleanor nodded. "I can do better than that. My son-in-law is a locksmith in Tullymore. I'll give him a call right now. We can be here in 30 minutes. True to her word, Eleanor's son-in-law Rick arrived shortly after, toolbox in hand. He was a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened soberly as Eleanor explained the situation in her own colorful terms. "So this lady's good-for-nothing son stole her house right out from under her, and now we need to make sure he can't just waltz in whenever he pleases," Eleanor concluded. Rick looked at me with sympathy. "I'm sorry this is happening to you, ma'am. Let's get those locks changed." An hour later, the cabin had new locks on all doors, and I had the only keys. I paid Rick generously, thanking him profusely. "Don't mention it," he said, packing up his tools. "My mom went through something similar with my brother a few years back. These things happen more often than people talk about." He handed me a business card. "Call me if you need anything else, day or night." After Rick left, Eleanor helped me unpack and get settled. We agreed to have dinner together that evening, giving me some time alone to reacquaint myself with my beloved cabin. Once Eleanor had gone back to her place, I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. The large windows facing the lake, the stone fireplace Jack and I had always dreamed about, the simple but comfortable furniture I had collected over the years. This place represented not just my financial investment, but my emotional one as well. Every corner held a piece of my heart. I walked out onto the porch and sat in Jack's rocking chair, looking out at the lake. The water was calm today, reflecting the blue sky and fluffy white clouds. A pair of loons called to each other in the distance. This was what I had worked for. This was what I deserved. My phone rang, shattering the peaceful moment. Bradley's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom, where are you?" He sounded annoyed. "I stopped by your house to drop off some of Jessica's homemade bread, and you weren't there." Mrs. Abernathy next door said she saw you loading up your car this morning. I'm at the lake house, I said simply. There was a pause. The lake house? Why? I told you we were planning to use it this summer. And I told you I had my own plans, I reminded him. I've just retired, Bradley. I've worked hard my entire life. I'm going to enjoy my lake house this summer. Mom, we've already made arrangements. Jessica's parents are coming for the 4th of July weekend, and… Then you'll need to make other arrangements, I interrupted, again surprising myself with my firmness. I'm not leaving. Bradley's voice dropped to a whisper, and I could tell he had moved somewhere private. Mom, we've talked about this. The lake house is in my name now. It's better this way for tax purposes and estate planning. So there it washes admission, not a full confession of his deception, but close enough. Yes, I'm aware that you put the lake house in your name, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Linda from the county clerk's office showed me the record. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, it's not what you think. This is for your own good. Taking away the home I paid for, that I just finished paying off last year, is for my own good? I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice now. Explain to me how that works, Bradley. You're getting older, Mom. You need to be thinking about downsizing, maybe assisted living in a few years. The lake house is an asset we can use to secure your future care. I'm 67, not 97, I said, and my future care is none of your concern at the moment. What concerns me is that you went behind my back to take something that was mine. I didn't go behind your back, Bradley protested. You signed the papers. Papers you told me were to help with my finances in case something happened to me. You never said you were taking ownership of my house. Mom, you're being emotional right now. Let's talk about this when you're thinking more clearly. Why don't you come back home and we can? I am home, I said firmly. This is my home, Bradley, the home I worked for, the home I paid for, and I'm not leaving. Mom. Goodbye, Bradley. I'm going to enjoy the sunset now. I hung up, my hands shaking but my resolve unbroken. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. After the 4th call, I turned it off completely and set it on the side table next to Jack's chair. I sat there as the afternoon turned to evening, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The lake turned golden, then pink, then a deep purple as the day ended. It was as beautiful as I remembered, maybe even more so because now I was fighting for it. Eleanor came over as promised, bringing a casserole and a bottle of wine. We sat on the porch, eating and drinking and planning. You know he'll come up here, she said, pouring us each another glass of Merlot. I know, I nodded. Probably tomorrow. What will you do when he does? I took a sip of wine, considering the question carefully. I'll tell him the truth that what he did was wrong, and I won't stand for it. I'll tell him he has 2 choices, transfer the lake house back to me, or I'll contest the transfer legally and tell everyone we know what he did. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. That's quite the ultimatum. Are you prepared for him to choose option 2? I am, I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. I've spent my life avoiding conflict, always giving in to keep the peace. Not anymore. Some things are worth fighting for. That night, I slept better than I had in months, lulled by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant call of a whippoorwill. This was where I belonged. This was where I would make my stand. I woke early the next morning, made coffee, and took it out to the porch. The lake was shrouded in mist, giving it a magical, otherworldly quality. Rusty joined me, purring contentedly as he settled on my lap. We sat together in companionable silence, watching as the sun rose and began to burn away the mist. Around 9, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I set my coffee cup down and gently moved Rusty to the empty chair beside me. From my vantage point, I could see Bradley's black SUV coming down the road, kicking up dust behind it. My heart began to race, but I forced myself to remain seated, outwardly calm. The SUV pulled up behind my Honda, and Bradley got out. He was alone, which surprised me. I had expected him to bring Jessica and the kids as emotional leverage. He was dressed casually in khakis and a polo shirt, his city clothes that always looked slightly out of place at the lake. He spotted me on the porch and walked over, his expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Mom," he said, by way of greeting, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Bradley," I replied, not inviting him up. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache despite everything. "You changed the locks." "I did." "That's not." He stopped himself, visibly collecting his thoughts. "Mom, can we talk about this reasonably? You're not thinking clearly." "Actually, Bradley, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You can come up and sit if you'd like to have a civil conversation." He hesitated, then climbed the steps and took the offered seat. We sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the lake rather than at each other. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally, turning to face him. "Why did you take my house?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't take it, Mom. I was helping to protect your assets. At your age, you need to be thinking about the future, about potential medical costs, about estate planning. So, you decided to start planning my estate while I'm still very much alive," I said dryly. "How thoughtful." "This isn't a joke, Mom. Do you know how much assisted living costs these days? Or in home care? Thousands of dollars a month. The lake house is an investment property that can help secure your future." "An investment property," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Is that all it is to you? Not the dream I worked 35 years to achieve? Not the place your father encouraged me to save for even when we could barely make ends meet? Just an investment property?" Bradley had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Of course I understand what it means to you, but we have to be practical. You're not getting any younger." "None of us are," I pointed out. "But I'm healthy, independent, and perfectly capable of making my own financial decisions. What you did wasn't helping. Mate was deceiving me." "I never lied to you," Bradley protested. "You told me the papers were to put your name on my accounts just in case. You never said you were transferring ownership of my lake house to yourself." "That's a lie of omission, Bradley, and you know it." He didn't respond immediately, his gaze returning to the lake. A family of ducks swam by, the mother leading a line of ducklings through the still water. "What do you want, Mom?" he finally asked, his voice softer. "I want my house back," I said simply. "I want you to transfer the deed back to me, where it belongs." Bradley shook his head. "It's not that simple. There would be tax implications, potential gift taxes." "Then unsimple it," I interrupted. "You're the real estate expert, the financial wizard. Figure it out." "And if I don't?" he asked, a challenge in his voice. I looked my son directly in the eyes. This man I had raised, this person I had sacrificed so much for, who now sat across from me trying to justify taking what was rightfully mine. "If you don't," I said evenly, "I will contest the transfer legally. Thomas is already looking into it. I'll tell everyone what you did. Your friends, our family, your in-laws, the people at church, everyone. I'll fight you every step of the way, and I'll make sure that everyone knows exactly what kind of son you really are." Bradley's face flushed. "You wouldn't do that." "I absolutely would," I assured him. "I've spent my entire life putting everyone else first. Your father, you, my students at school, everyone. I've done my duty. I've earned this place, and I won't let anyone take it from me, not even you." "This isn't like you, Mom," Bradley said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You've never been confrontational. You've always been reasonable." "Perhaps that's because no one has ever tried to steal my home before," I replied. "It brings out a side of me even I didn't know existed." Bradley stood up abruptly. "I need to think about this. You're not being rational." "Take all the time you need," I said calmly, remaining seated. "But know this, I'm staying here for the summer, as I planned. If you try to evict me or force me out, I will make it the most public, most embarrassing experience of your life. Is that what you want? To be known as the man who evicted his widowed mother from her own home?" Bradley didn't answer. He turned and walked back to his SUV, his shoulders tense. I watched as he got in, started the engine, and drove away, the dust settling behind him. Only when his car was completely out of sight did I allow myself to tremble, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up with me. Rusty, sensing my distress, jumped back into my lap, purring loudly as if to comfort me. "I did it, Jack," I whispered, looking at the empty rocking chair beside me. "I stood up for myself." I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of emotional limbo, proud of my newfound courage, yet anxious about what would come next. Would Bradley call my bluff? Would he try to force me out legally? Had I just permanently damaged my relationship with my only child? Eleanor came over in the afternoon, bearing freshly baked cookies and curiosity. "I saw Bradley's car earlier," she said, settling into a chair on the porch. "How did it go?" I recounted the conversation as accurately as I could, including my ultimatum. Eleanor listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Good for you," she said when I finished. "It's about time someone stood up to that boy. He's been taking advantage of your good nature for years." "Has he?" I asked, genuinely curious. Had I been blind to my son's true nature all this time? Eleanor gave me a look that was both kind and exasperated. "Margaret, who paid for his college, his first car? Who babysits his children whenever he asks, even on short notice? Who still makes his favorite meals when he visits, as if he were 12 instead of 42? I didn't answer. She was right, of course. I had always given Bradley everything I could, never asking for anything in return. It was what mothers did, wasn't it? At least, that's what I had always believed. "There's a difference between loving your child and letting them walk all over you," Eleanor continued gently. "You've been doing the former and allowing the latter for far too long." That evening, I called Thomas to update him on the situation. "Bradley came by today," I told him. "I made it clear I want the house transferred back to me." "Good," Thomas said. "I've been doing some research, and I think we have a strong case for undue influence or misrepresentation if he doesn't cooperate." "Did he give any indication of what he plans to do?" "He said he needs to think about it," I replied. "But he wasn't happy." "I wouldn't expect him to be," Thomas said dryly. "Listen, Aunt Maggie, if he contacts you again, try to get him to admit in writing, text or email would be ideal, that he had you sign those transfer documents without fully explaining what they were. That would strengthen our case considerably." After hanging up with Thomas, I turned my phone back on to find 6 missed calls and several text messages from Bradley. The texts ranged from concerned, "Mom, please call me back, we need to talk about this," to frustrated, "You're not being reasonable," to angry, "This is my house now, legally, and you can't just change the locks." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made myself a simple dinner, fed Rusty, and sat on the porch watching another magnificent sunset over Lake Tullymore. Whatever happened next, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. The following day passed quietly. I spent the morning cleaning the cabin, which had been closed up for the winter and needed a good airing out. In the afternoon, I walked into Tona's small collection of shops and restaurants about a mile from my place and bought groceries for the week. Several locals recognized me and welcomed me back for the season. "Earlier than usual this year, aren't you, Mrs. Wilson?" asked Jim at the general store as he rang up my purchases. "I've retired now," I explained with a smile, "so I can spend the whole summer at the lake." "Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations on your retirement." As I walked home, bags in hand, I felt a sense of community I'd never fully appreciated before. These people knew me, they respected me, they were glad to see me. Why had I never noticed that before? When I returned to the cabin, there was a large manila envelope taped to my front door. My name was written across it in Bradley's handwriting. I set my groceries down on the porch and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a thick documenta deed transfer form, already filled out, transferring ownership of the lake house back to me. It was signed by Bradley, but not yet notarized. Also inside was a short note. "Mom, you win. Get this notarized and file it with the county. We'll talk when you're ready. B." I sank into Jack's rocking chair, the papers clutched to my chest. I had done it. I had stood my ground, and Bradley had backed down. The lake house would be mine again, legally, officially mine. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end of it. There would be conversations to have, wounds to heal, boundaries to establish. My relationship with my son would never be quite the same. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Perhaps it was time for a new relationship based on mutual respect, rather than my endless accommodation. As the sun began to set on my third day at Lake Tullymore, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: true independence. Not just financial independence, though that was certainly part of it, but emotional independence. The freedom to put myself first, the courage to stand up for what was rightfully mine, the strength to say no when necessary. I looked out at the golden light dancing across the water and raised my glass in a silent toast. To Jack, who had always believed in me, to myself, for finally believing in me too, and to the summer ahead, a summer that was now truly mine. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Bradley again. This time, I answered. "I got the deed transfer," I said by way of greeting. "Good," he replied, his voice subdued. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." And? "And you're right, I shouldn't have done it the way I did. I thought I was helping, making sure the lake house stayed in the family, protecting your interests, but I should have been honest with you." It wasn't quite the apology I deserved, but it was a start. "Yes, you should have." There was a pause, then Bradley sighed. "So what happens now?" "Now I get the deed notarized and filed," I said, "and then we really talk about boundaries and respect, and what kind of relationship we want to have going forward." "And the lake house? This summer?" "The lake house is mine," I said firmly. "I'll be staying here as planned, but," I added, softening slightly, "you and Jessica and the kids are welcome to visit. Not for the whole summer, but for a week or two perhaps, as guests." Another pause. "I guess that's fair," Bradley finally said. "More than fair, actually." "It is," I agreed. "I've always tried to be fair, Bradley. All I ask is the same in return." After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The first chapter of my retirement wasn't going quite as I had planned, but in some ways, it was going better. I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed. I had fought for what was mine and won, and now, finally, I could truly begin the rest of my life on my terms. Eleanor's porch light came on next door, and I saw her silhouette as she came outside with a glass of wine. She waved when she spotted me. "Come over," she called. "I've got a fresh bottle open." I smiled and stood up. "I'll be right there," I called back. "I've got news." As I walked across the yard to Eleanor's cabin, deed papers still in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. The summer stretched before me, full of possibility and promise. My summer. At my lake house, just as I had always dreamed. 2 weeks after my confrontation with Bradley, I sat at the kitchen table of my lake house with Thomas, watching as he carefully reviewed the notarized deed transfer. "Everything looks in order, Aunt Maggie," he said, placing the documents back in their folder. "I'll file these with the county clerk tomorrow. Within a week or so, the lake house will be officially yours again." "Thank you," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I couldn't have done this without you." Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that reminded me so much of my sister. "You did the hard part yourself. Standing up to Bradley couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted, "but it was necessary." After Thomas left, I made myself a cup of tea and took it out to the porch. The weather had turned warmer, and the lake was coming alive with activity. A few boats were out on the water, and children's laughter carried across from the public beach on the far shore. Summer at Lake Tullymore was officially beginning. I had been keeping busy during my 2 weeks at the lake. The cabin needed some maintenance after the winter loose shutter to fix, gutters to clean, gardens to prepare for planting. I had always been handy, a necessity when raising a child on a tight budget, and the physical work felt good, satisfying. Each repair I made to the cabin felt like I was reclaiming it, making it mine again in the most tangible ways. Eleanor had introduced me to her weekly card group for other women, all around my age or older, who gathered every Thursday afternoon for pinnacle and gossip. They had welcomed me warmly, especially after hearing an abbreviated version of what had happened with Bradley. Doris, a retired nurse in her 70s, had said with a dismissive wave of her hand, "They always think they know what's best for us, don't they?" My son tried to talk me into selling my house and moving into one of those senior living communities last year, added Phyllis, the youngest of the group at 63. I told him I'd consider it when I couldn't climb my own stairs anymore, and not a day sooner. There was something freeing about being around women my own age, women who understood the unique challenges we faced as we got older. The assumption that we were becoming less capable, less independent, less ourselves somehow. The well-meaning but patronizing help from adult children who saw only our age, not our abilities. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from Bradley. "Just checking in. Have you filed the deed transfer yet?" I typed back, "Thomas is filing it tomorrow." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Great! Jessica and I were wondering if we could bring the kids up for the 4th of July weekend. Just for 3 days. We'd stay at the lodge in town, not at the lake house." I considered his request. The 4th of July was still more than a month away. I had planned to host Eleanor and some of her friends for a barbecue, but there was no reason Bradley and his family couldn't join us. And the fact that he was suggesting they stay at the lodge rather than assuming they would stay at the lake house showed some progress. "That would be fine," I replied. "You're welcome to join us for a barbecue on the 4th. Eleanor and some neighbors will be here." "Thanks, Mom," came his immediate response. Then, after a pause, "I really am sorry about everything." I stared at those words for a long moment. It was the first direct apology he had offered. It felt significant, though I wasn't quite ready to fully trust it yet. "I appreciate that," I wrote back. "We'll talk more when you're here." The days settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise from the lake. Then there would be some project around the house, planting my vegetable garden, touching up paint on the shutters, organizing the small shed where I kept tools and lake equipment. Afternoons often found me reading in Jack's chair or taking walks around the lake. Evenings were for sunsets and sometimes dinner with Eleanor or other neighbors. I was surprised to find how content I was in my own company. After decades of caring for others, first Jack, then Bradley, then my students at the school, I was finally learning to care for myself, to enjoy my own thoughts, to move at my own pace. A week after Thomas filed the deed transfer, I received official confirmation that the lake house was once again in my name. I celebrated with a small glass of champagne on the porch, toasting Jack's empty chair. "We did it, old man," I said aloud. "It's ours again." That same evening, I received an unexpected call. It was Jessica, Bradley's wife. "Margaret? It's Jessica. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all," I said, surprised. Jessica and I had always been cordial, but we weren't particularly close. She rarely called me directly. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine," she assured me quickly. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with the lake house." I braced myself. Was she calling to defend Bradley? To try to convince me that his intentions had been good? "Bradley told me everything," she continued, "and I want you to know that I had no idea what he had done. He told me the lake house was going to be part of some estate planning you two had worked out together. I never would have gone along with it if I'd known the truth." I felt a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to release. "Thank you for telling me that, Jessica. I appreciate it." "I'm really embarrassed," she admitted. "When he suggested we use the lake house for the whole summer, I was excited about it. The kids love it there, and I thought—" She trailed off. "You thought I had agreed to it," I finished for her. "Yes," she said quietly. "I should have checked with you directly. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "Bradley should have been honest with both of us." There was a pause, then Jessica said, "He's been different since all this happened. More thoughtful, I think. More aware of how his actions affect others." Another pause. "He's a good man at heart, Margaret. He gets caught up in his own plans sometimes and doesn't think about how others might feel." It was a generous assessment, one that came from a place of love, and perhaps she was right. Perhaps Bradley wasn't deliberately malicious, just self-centered in a way I had inadvertently encouraged throughout his life. "I believe that," I said finally, "and I hope this experience helps him grow." "I think it already has," Jessica said. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that I'm on your side in all this. What he did wasn't right." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my porch, listening to the night sounds of the lake, the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. Jessica's call had been unexpected, but healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. It felt good to know that she understood, that she saw the situation clearly. The next few weeks passed in a pleasant blur. June arrived, bringing warmer temperatures and more activity on the lake. I fell into an easy friendship with Eleanor's card group, even hosting them at my cabin one Thursday when Eleanor had a doctor's appointment in the city. I also began volunteering at the local library 2 mornings a week, helping with their summer reading program for children. It was different from my work in the school cafeteria, quieter, more focused on individual interactions, but I found I enjoyed it immensely. The children were curious and eager, and I discovered I had a talent for storytelling that held their attention during the weekly read-aloud sessions. One morning in mid-June, I was kneeling in my garden, weeding around the tomato plants that were finally beginning to flower, when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the sun, to see a familiar black SUV pulling up. Bradley stepped out, alone again. He was dressed more casually this time, in shorts and a t-shirt, looking more appropriate for the lake setting. He spotted me in the garden and walked over, stopping a respectful distance away. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice tentative. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "Bradley, this is a surprise." He shifted uncomfortably. "I was in the area for work and thought I'd stop by. Is that okay?" I nodded, standing up and removing my gardening gloves. Of course. Would you like some iced tea? I made some fresh this morning. That would be great, thanks. I led the way to the porch, where I had a pitcher of tea chilling. Bradley followed, his eyes taking in the small changes I had made to the property, the freshly painted shutters, the new flower beds along the path, the bird feeders I had hung from the tree branches. The place looks good, he said as I poured 2 glasses of tea. You've been busy. I have, I agreed, handing him a glass and sitting down in my usual chair. He took Jack's rocker after a moment's hesitation. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, both looking out at the lake rather than at each other. I got confirmation that the deed transfer went through, I said finally. The lake house is officially mine again. Bradley nodded. Good. That's good. He took a sip of his tea, then set the glass down carefully. Mom, I owe you a real apology. What I did was wrong. I convinced myself I was helping you, protecting your assets, planning for your future, but the truth is, I was being selfish. I wanted the lake house for our family, and I took advantage of your trust to get it. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between us, sincere and weighty. I studied my son's face, the face I had known and loved from the moment he was born 42 years ago. There was genuine remorse there, and something else. A new respect, perhaps. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened. Jessica's been helping me see things more clearly, he admitted. She was pretty upset when she found out what I'd done, said it wasn't how we treat family, especially not you, after everything you've done for us. I made a mental note to thank Jessica the next time we spoke. She called me a couple of weeks ago, I told him. It was a good conversation. Bradley looked surprised. She didn't mention that. I think she wanted to make things right in her own way, I said, just as you're trying to do now. Bradley picked up his tea again, his gaze returning to the lake. Do you remember when you first brought me here? I must have been about 9 or 10. We rented that little yellow cabin down the shore for a weekend. I smiled at the memory. I remember. You caught your first fish off the public dock. A tiny sunfish, Bradley laughed. But I was so proud. You were, I agreed. You made me take about 20 pictures of you holding it. I think that's when I fell in love with this place too, he said quietly. I've always associated it with, I don't know, possibility, freedom, the good parts of childhood. I understood what he meant. Lake Tullymore had represented those things for me, as well a brief escape from the financial struggles and day-to-day stresses that had defined so much of my life. I think that's why I wanted it so badly for my own kids, Bradley continued. I wanted them to have those same feelings, those same memories. They can still have those memories, I said. Just not at the expense of mine. Bradley nodded slowly. I understand that now. I didn't before, but I do now. He turned to face me directly. I've been doing a lot of thinking since all this happened. About how I've treated you over the years, taking you for granted, assuming you'd always put my needs first because that's what you've always done. I felt a lump form in my throat. It's what mothers do, I said softly. At least, it's what I thought mothers were supposed to do. Maybe to an extent, Bradley acknowledged. But I'm 42 years old, Mom. I should have outgrown expecting you to sacrifice for me a long time ago. It was a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from my son. Perhaps this experience had sparked growth in both of us. Where do we go from here? I asked after a moment. Bradley took a deep breath. I'd like to start over, in a way. Build a healthier relationship, one where I respect your boundaries and your independence. He gave a rueful smile. One where I remember that you're a person with your own needs and dreams, not just my mom. I'd like that, I said honestly. We talked for another hour, more openly than we had in years. Bradley told me about challenges at work, about his concerns for his oldest child who was struggling in school, about his and Jessica's plans to possibly relocate to a different suburb next year. I shared my experiences since retiring, my volunteer work at the library, my new friends in the card group, my plans to possibly take a painting class in the fall. When he finally stood to leave, our relationship felt different. Not completely healed, that would take time, but moving in the right direction. "We're still on for the 4th of July weekend?" he asked as he prepared to go. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "Bring your swimsuits, the water should be perfect by then." After Bradley left, I sat on the porch for a long time, processing our conversation. There was a lightness in my chest that hadn't been there before, a sense that something broken was beginning to mend. The weeks leading up to the 4th of July passed quickly. My garden was thriving, producing more vegetables than I could eat alone. I shared the abundance with Eleanor and my other neighbors, and in return received fresh eggs from Phyllis's chickens and homemade bread from Doris. I continued my volunteer work at the library, expanding my role to include helping with a special program for seniors learning to use computers. It was a perfect fit, as I was just enough ahead of my peers in technology skills to be helpful but not so advanced that I couldn't understand their frustrations. The week before the 4th, I called Jessica to confirm their visit. "We're looking forward to it," she assured me. "The kids talk about the lake house constantly." "How are they doing?" I asked. "Bradley mentioned that Aaron was having some trouble in school." Jessica sighed. "He's struggling with reading. The school thinks he might have dyslexia, but the testing process is so slow. We're on a waiting list for a private evaluation." "Has he been enjoying the summer reading program at his local library?" I asked. "We haven't tried that," Jessica admitted. "With everything going on, it hasn't been a priority." "You know," I said thoughtfully, "I've been volunteering with the summer reading program here. I've learned some techniques that might help Aaron. Maybe while you're visiting, I could spend some time with him." "Would you?" Jessica sounded relieved. "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Margaret." When the 4th of July weekend finally arrived, I found myself unexpectedly nervous. This would be the first time I'd seen my grandchildren since the confrontation with Bradley. Would they sense the tension? Would things be awkward? I needn't have worried. The moment their car pulled up, 9-year-old Aaron and 7-year-old Emma came tumbling out, racing toward me with excited shouts of "Grandma!" They threw themselves into my arms with their usual enthusiasm, and any worries I'd had melted away. "The lake looks amazing," Emma declared, her eyes wide as she took in the sparkling water. "Can we go swimming right away, please?" "After you've helped bring in the luggage and had some lunch," Jessica said firmly, coming up behind them with a cooler in her arms. "Hi, Margaret. It's good to see you." She set down the cooler and gave me a warm hug, warmer than her usual polite embrace. "Really good," she added quietly. Bradley was last, carrying several bags and looking slightly nervous. "Hi, Mom," he said, setting down the bags to give me a quick hug. "Thanks for having us." "I'm glad you're here," I said, and found that I meant it. The day passed in a blur of activity. The children wanted to swim immediately after lunch, so we all headed down to my small private beach. I had bought some new water toys for them, inflatable rafts and pool noodles that they put to enthusiastic use. Bradley and Jessica joined them in the water while I watched from the shore, content to dangle my feet in the cool lake. Later, as Jessica helped me prepare dinner in the kitchen, she brought up the lake house situation again. "Bradley really was devastated when he realized how hurt you were," she said, chopping vegetables for a salad. "He couldn't sleep for days afterward, kept saying he'd never seen that look on your face before." I paused in my task of marinating the chicken for the grill. "What look?" "Betrayal," Jessica said simply. "He said it was like something broke between you in that moment and he was terrified it couldn't be fixed." I considered this as I returned to my work. I think we're on the way to fixing it, I said after a moment. But it will take time, and things will be different between us. Jessica nodded. Different can be good, though. More honest, maybe. Yes, I agreed. More honest. The evening brought my neighbors for the promised barbecue. Eleanor arrived first, bearing a homemade pie. She was followed by Doris and her husband George, Phyllis, and a few other neighbors I had gotten to know over the past month. I made introductions all around, pleased to see Bradley and Jessica making an effort to engage with my new friends. The children darted between the adults, occasionally pausing long enough to grab a hot dog or some watermelon before racing off again to play. As dusk fell, we gathered on the beach with blankets and chairs to watch the fireworks that would soon be launched from the town dock across the lake. Aaron settled next to me on my blanket, his small body warm against my side. "Grandma," he said, his voice hesitant, "Dad said you're going to help me with reading while we're here." "I'd be happy to," I told him. "I've learned some fun games that might make reading easier for you." He leaned in closer. "Dad said you're really smart, that you worked really hard your whole life so you could have this lake house." I glanced over at Bradley, who was deep in conversation with George about fishing spots on the lake. "Your dad said that?" Aaron nodded. "He said you're the strongest person he knows and that we should all be more like you." A lump formed in my throat. "Well," I managed to say, "that's very nice of him." "Is it true you worked in a school cafeteria for 30 years?" Aaron asked. "It is," I confirmed. "I served lunch to thousands of children over the years." "That's a lot of lunches," Aaron said, clearly impressed. "Did you like it?" I thought about the question. "Most days I did," I said honestly. "It wasn't what I dreamed of doing when I was your age, but it was steady work that helped support our family. And I got to see a lot of children grow up over the years, which was special." "What did you dream of doing?" Aaron asked, his eyes curious. No one had asked me that question in decades. "I wanted to be a librarian," I admitted. "I've always loved books." "Like where you volunteer now?" "Yes, like that." Aaron considered this information. "So you're kind of doing your dream job now, even though it took a really long time." I smiled at his perception. "I suppose I am, in a way." "That's cool," Aaron declared. "Mom says it's never too late to do what makes you happy." "Your mom is very wise," I told him. The first fireworks burst overhead, drawing gasps of delight from everyone gathered on the beach. As red, white, and blue sparks cascaded across the night sky, I looked around at the Sinemi grandchildren's faces, illuminated by the colorful explosions. My son and daughter-in-law sitting close together on a nearby blanket, my new friends chatting and exclaiming over particularly impressive displays. This wasn't the summer I had planned when I retired. It was more complicated, more emotionally challenging than I had anticipated. But as I sat there with my grandson leaning against me, watching fireworks reflect on the lake I loved, I realized it was also richer, deeper, more meaningful than the peaceful, a solitary summer I had envisioned. The following morning, while Jessica took Emma for a walk around the lake and Bradley went into town for groceries, I sat with Aaron on the porch to begin our reading session. I had prepared some materials based on what I'd learned in the library program, adapting them to appeal to Aaron's interests in space and dinosaurs. "Reading is hard for me," Aaron confessed as we settled into our chairs. "The letters get all jumbled up." "That happens to a lot of people," I assured him. "It doesn't mean you're not smart, your brain just processes words differently. We're going to try some techniques that might help." We started with a simple game that involved matching pictures to words, then moved on to a story about a dinosaur astronaut that I'd found at the library. I had Aaron read a sentence, then I would read a sentence, taking turns to reduce his anxiety. After about 30 minutes, I could see he was getting tired, so I suggested we take a break. "You did really well," I told him. especially with the longer words. Aaron beamed at the praise. It was easier with you helping, he said. Can we do this again tomorrow? Absolutely, I promised. When Bradley and Jessica returned, I pulled them aside to share some observations and suggestions about Aaron's reading. He's definitely showing signs of dyslexia. I told them, but there are specific techniques that can help. I've written down some games and exercises you can try at home, and the names of a few books that might be good for his reading level. Thank you, Margaret, Jessica said, taking the notes I offered. This is incredibly helpful. Bradley was staring at me with an odd expression. What? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said, shaking his head slightly. It's just, you're really good at this. I had no idea. At what? Teaching, connecting with kids, understanding how they learn. He gave a small laugh. I guess there's a lot I don't know about you. I guess there is, I agreed. The rest of their visit passed quickly but pleasantly. We swam, played board games when an afternoon thunderstorm kept us indoors, and enjoyed meals together on the porch. On their final evening, Bradley asked if he could speak with me privately, so we took a walk along the shore as the sun began to set. I've been thinking a lot about what happened with the lake house, he said as we walked, about why I felt entitled to take something that was so important to you. I waited, letting him find his words. I think I've always seen your sacrifices for me as just what parents do. I never really stopped to think about what those sacrifices cost you. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. When Dad died, you put everything into making sure I could still go to college, that my life would stay on track. You never complained, never made me feel guilty about the extra shifts you were taking or the things you were giving up. That was my choice, I said softly. I know, but I should have appreciated it more, recognized it more. He turned to face me. I'm sorry it took something like this to make me see you, really see you as a person with your own dreams and needs, not just as my mom. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Thank you for saying that. I want things to be different going forward, Bradley continued. I want to support your dreams the way you've always supported mine. I smiled through my tears. I'd like that. We stood together in silence for a moment, watching as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It's beautiful here, Bradley said quietly. I can see why you fought so hard for it. It was never just about the property, I told him. It was about what it represented, all those years of work, of sacrifice, my dream finally coming true. Bradley nodded. I understand that now. He hesitated, then added, would it be okay if we visited again later in the summer? Maybe in August, just for a weekend? I'd like that, I said honestly. And next summer, well, we can talk about a week or two for your family to use the lake house, as long as it's planned in advance, with my agreement. Bradley smiled. That sounds more than fair. After they left the next morning, the lake house felt strangely quiet. I had grown accustomed to the children's laughter, to the constant activity of having family around. But the solitude was welcome to a chance to reflect on how much had changed in just a few short weeks. I decided to take advantage of the beautiful day by taking my lunch down to the dock. As I sat there, feet dangling in the cool water, sandwich in hand, I thought about the conversation with Bradley, about Aaron's perception that I was finally living my dream, albeit decades later than planned. There was truth in that. My volunteer work at the library was deeply satisfying, tapping into passions I had set aside long ago. And here at the lake house, I had found a community, a sense of belonging that had been missing in my life. Eleanor spotted me on the dock and waved from her yard. Lunch with a view, she called. I waved her over. Join me. As Eleanor made her way down to the dock, I thought about how much my life had expanded since I'd taken my stand against Bradley. New friendships, new activities, new confidence in my own worth and abilities. Your family visits seem to go well, Eleanor commented as she settled beside me on the dock. Better than I expected, I admitted. I think we've turned a corner. Good, Eleanor said firmly. It's about time that boy recognized what a remarkable mother he has. I laughed. I don't know about remarkable. I do, Eleanor insisted. Not many women your age would have had the courage to stand up to their own child the way you did. Most would have given in, convinced themselves it was for the best. I came close, I confessed. For a moment there, I almost convinced myself that maybe Bradley was right, that maybe I should just accept what he'd done and move on. But you didn't, Eleanor pointed out. You fought back. You reclaimed what was yours. I nodded, looking out across the sparkling water of Lake Tullymore. I did. So what now? Eleanor asked. What's next for Margaret Wilson, woman of independent means? I laughed at her dramatic phrasing. I haven't thought that far ahead. Enjoy the summer, certainly. Continue my volunteer work. Maybe plant a bigger garden next year. You could write a book, Eleanor suggested, about standing up for yourself in your golden years. I bet a lot of women our age would relate. The idea made me smile. Maybe I will. As July turned to August, the rhythm of lake life continued. The card group met weekly. My garden produced an abundance of vegetables, and my volunteer work at the library expanded to include organizing a book club for seniors. I spoke with Bradley and Jessica regularly, our conversations more open and honest than they had been in years. Aaron called me himself one evening, excited to share that he had finished reading a whole chapter book on his own. I used those special techniques you showed me. He told me proudly. They really helped. I'm so proud of you, I told him, my heart full. That's a wonderful accomplishment. Mom says maybe you can help me more when we visit in August, he said hopefully. I'd love that, I assured him. True to his word, Bradley brought the family for another weekend in mid-August. This visit was even more relaxed than the July one, with a natural ease that had been missing before. On their final evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset, the children having already gone to bed exhausted from a full day of swimming and boating. Mom, Bradley said, breaking the comfortable silence. Jessica and I have been talking, and we'd like to put some money toward fixing up the boathouse next spring. As a gift to you, but also so we can keep a small boat here for when we visit, if that's okay with you. I was touched by the gesture. That would be lovely, I said. The boathouse definitely needs some work. And maybe we could come up for a week next summer, Jessica suggested. Early July, perhaps? I think that could be arranged, I said with a smile. As long as it's understood that it's a visit, not a takeover. Absolutely understood, Bradley assured me. As the summer began to wind down, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey these past few months had taken me on. What had begun as a shock and a betrayal had led to profound changes in my relationship with my son, in my sense of self, in my willingness to stand up for what was rightfully mine. Eleanor and I took to having our morning coffee together on my porch, watching as subtle signs of the approaching autumn began to appear, a few early turning leaves, slightly cooler mornings, the gradual shift in the angle of the sunlight. Will you stay through September? Eleanor asked one morning. Most of the summer people will be gone after Labor Day. I had been considering that very question. Originally, I had planned to return to my house in town once summer ended. But now, the thought of leaving the lake felt wrong somehow. I think I might stay longer, I said, maybe even into October, to see the fall colors. Eleanor smiled. Good. I was hoping you would. In fact, I continued, the idea forming as I spoke, I've been thinking about making the lake house my primary residence, selling the house in town. It's too big for just me anyway, and I feel more at home here than I have anywhere in years. Really? Eleanor looked delighted. That would be wonderful. But what about winter? The lake gets pretty quiet then. I shrugged. I don't mind quiet, and it would give me time to work on that book you suggested. Eleanor raised her coffee mug in a toast. To new beginnings, it's never too late. Never too late, I echoed, clinking my mug against hers. That evening, I called Bradley to share my decision about making the lake house my permanent home. Are you sure, Mom? He asked. The winters can be harsh up there. I'm sure, I told him. This is where I want to be. There was a pause. Then Bradley said, well, if that's what you want, I support you. And maybe we can come up for a weekend in the winter too. Kids would love to go sledding on that big hill behind the house. I'd like that, I said. After we hung up, I took my usual place on the porch, in the chair next to Jack's rocker. The sun was setting, casting long golden light across the water. A pair of loons called to each other in the distance, their haunting cries echoing across the lake. You should see it, Jack, I said softly to the empty chair beside me. Everything's different now. I'm different. The breeze ruffled my hair, almost like a tender touch. I smiled, imagining Jack's approval, his pride in what I had accomplished. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the clear sky above, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The lake house was truly mine now, in a way it hadn't been before. Not just legally, but emotionally. I had claimed it, fought for it, made it my own. And in doing so, I had claimed something even more valuable. My own voice, my own power, my right to put myself first after decades of putting everyone else first. This was my house, my lake, my life. And for the first time in years maybe, ever I was living it exactly as I chose.